when it comes to like, are they robots, right? Like the name agent in agentic AI agent or whatever, that definitely does a lot of heavy lifting. I think it makes a lot of people imagine like Agent Smith from the Matrix or something, wearing a tie and has a W-9 or something. But in practice, I think what we're talking about is much more grounded.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to Clarity on Tech. My name is Zach Warren, Technology and Innovation Insights Lead for the Thomson Reuters Institute. And today, especially if you've been hearing us talk about generative AI in recent months and years, well, we have what may be, call it even more futuristic technology for you, but one probably that will be on your desk sooner rather than later. This is agentic AI. The idea of AI agents have really been making headway within professional services, and especially the tax accounting and audit space in recent years. And here to talk agentic AI, how it's going to fit into tax, and what he's seen as somebody who's been playing around with this for a more often than I think most people have at this point, we have Michael Kim, Director of AI Integration and Customer Success at Thomson Reuters. How are you doing today, Michael?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Doing well. I'm excited to be here and talk about the future.
I'm always excited to talk about the future, but I think this one might get people's hairs on the back of their neck standing up a little bit more than some of the other topics that we talk about. But before we really dive into that, I kind of want to know your background. How exactly did you get into this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been in accounting for a while, about 6 years of accounting experience, and uh, actually, my dad was a CPA, so I think it was like, oh, I want to do something similar to what my dad does, and so I got into accounting. But then, I think the technology side of it was much more interesting to me, just in terms of like how I can inject technology into, an industry that I think has kind of been, not as nurtured in the technology space, but very much has been so in recent years. And so I think I just kind of wanted to be a part of that. And yeah, that's kind of how I find myself here now.
Nice. So let's dive right in because I feel like most people probably listening, it may be their first introduction to agentic AI, or maybe they've heard the name but don't really quite understand what exactly it is. So, to the layperson, how exactly would you describe agentic AI, especially within the tax space?
Yeah, I would say agentic I mean, it's just simply AI that can take action towards a goal. I think it doesn't just generate content or answer a question. It, plans steps and makes decisions and uses tools to or data uses tools or data to get things done. And you don't really have to have like human input to do so. So if you think about generative AI like ChatGPT or something, it's very reactive, and you give it a prompt and it gives you an output, right? Agentic AI, it takes that a step further, right? You give it a goal and it figures out how to achieve that goal, and it kind of breaks things down into steps, as well as makes decisions and executes along the way. And I think instead of saying summarize this context or content, you might say review these 5 contracts and flag something that might affect revenue recognition. An agentic system would pull the data, right? It would apply the rules, maybe loop in guidance from accounting standards library, and deliver something that's really decision ready. And the way I see it, it's like having an intern, who doesn't wait for the next instruction. They just start working through the problem. And I think one thing that's really important to call out here is that when it comes to agentic AI and generative AI, it's actually pretty hard to distinguish the differences in output, like at face value. And I think that's kind of the point. And it's one thing that I'm sure to explain to like a lot of accountants that we work with today, like especially when we're showing them the tools and like our tool, and they're always going to compare us to like a broad LM like ChatGPT or something. But like this is kind of how I like to break down the difference between them. Think about you imagine 2 people with the same level of competency when it comes to writing, right? And you give them both a prompt, write a proposal for a new internal tool to streamline onboarding. I think one person would think for a second and just kind of write something off the cuff, and they might have some good points and be directionally in the right place. But at the end of the day, there's no real process there, right? It's just a stream of consciousness that's being written in a different, like, or in like a decent format. The other person would break that down into different steps, right? So step one, review, our onboarding procedures and pain points from like internal documents. Step two, look up what other processes have been tried and look what tools we have available to us. Step three is draft it, revise it, and tailor the pitch, for like executive priorities. And that the second person is really asking themselves sub questions, pulling in context and revising it until it's tight. And I genuinely think that first person is fine for personal use, or not person, I guess, like that system would be fine for personal use. But in a professional setting, and especially scaling this out to your staff, what are you going to prefer? If you're going to hire someone to represent your firm, you should really consider, how that person processes steps that generate the outcomes that you're hiring them for. And I think choosing AI tools is no different.
So I kind of want to drill down, maybe even that little slip up there. You said person instead of system. This is supposed to be a system, and these are really geared toward very specific tasks. But a little of what you're talking about does sound like reasoning that maybe an accountant or maybe an accountant's assistant or intern, like you said, would be going through. So, are we talking about robot accountants here? Like, how much reasoning are they actually doing?
That's a good question. I think when it comes to like are they robots, right? Like the name agent in agentic AI agent or whatever. I think that definitely does a lot of heavy lifting. I think it makes a lot of people imagine like Agent Smith from the Matrix or something. Wearing a tie and has a W-9 or something. But in practice, I think what we're talking about is much more grounded. And I know, I guess in the beginning, I said I'm excited to talk about the future, but I think like it actually is not the future, right? It's like this is something that exists today, and it's just software that can take a task and carry it to the finish line without you needing to guide it through every step. And I think like the reality is it depends on your definition of robots, right? Like a robot can be an automated machine in one of those assembly lines, or it could be have like in that movie iRobot, there's like a literal sentient, conscious robotic being. But I think ultimately what we have today are little autonomous robots just living inside of our computers and in our code base. And what these robots are doing are all those little mundane tasks for us now. And so I think like kind of applying it practically speaking, in a tax workflow, that might look like something like a multi-state nexus check or something, right? Someone has to pull the sales data, sort it state by state, compare it against different economic thresholds, and then verify through state websites to confirm the rules and manually document that exposure. And like that could be messy. It's time consuming, and honestly, like no one really likes to do that stuff. An AI agent, can now run that kind of analysis on its own, and it uses tools, behind the scenes. So that's like your source data and guidance and all that kind of stuff, and it can really figure it out for you in kind of in a structured workflow that's ready to review. And I think that's the shift, right? It's not generating one-off answers. It's like doing the kind of work that takes someone bouncing around to different systems and opening a bunch of tabs. And so to answer that question, finally, like, are we getting to human or robot accountants? Honestly, to a degree, yes, like, but I have a Roomba in my apartment, so I
Yeah.
I, I own a robot. Can my Roomba wash my clothes and cook my dinner? No. So, I'd say we're getting to the point to where we have robots for a variety of use cases, but ultimately nowhere near the point of making accounting judgment calls or, anything else like a human would ultimately have to do.
Yeah. And I think that that's really the important point to try and emphasize is it's not necessarily human reasoning, thinking through a problem, but it's a very specific task and it's very good at doing those very specific tasks, much more so than any of the tools in the past would have been,
Right.
because it can chain logic a little bit more than what we've seen in the past, perhaps.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, I want to hone in on the tax audit and accounting space specifically. You talked over some of the use cases, especially talking through how exactly it would go into research, summarize, etc. But I'm kind of curious, is that really where you think AI agents are going to make their most impact to start in tax? Or how exactly are we going to see this rollout to begin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say today, it's definitely best suited for the kind of work that's, repeatable, procedural, and still takes too much time. Like but I still think like, there are tasks that require judgment. But a lot of these tasks that require judgment still require hours of collecting, organizing, and validating inputs and all that kind of stuff. And I guess like when it comes to like tax accounting and audit, like there are different kind of use cases when it comes to agentic AI. Just kind of like per the practices. But I think like on the tax side, it really is, it's that complex research today. Especially if the answer depends on kind of like the context that you actually have. Even being able to apply your own internal context and that along with public guidance and IRC, like I think like firms are using agentic AI to pull in past memos, or prior year work papers, client specific assumptions. I think is like really important, and hopefully it's all rooted in something authoritative, like for us it's Checkpoint. But then that all of those tools can be put together to build a full picture of what you're looking for, but before it drafts that response. And so I think on the tax side, like very much, research, a lot of extraction of kind of context of the way that, how do we do it last year? Like let's extract information from returns last year. Like I think that's kind of big on the tax side. But on the audit side, like we're building systems that can automate substantive testing, right? Like
Mm.
end to end. Like today, that's just like, think about, what an auditor does when they're doing substantive testing. They're sifting through different folders and reading and understanding context. Do I even know what this like folder is, like what's in this folder before I look inside of it, right? And I think agentic AI can basically just move and power through that entire process and prepare the results in a way that turns the most junior level staff into senior level preparers, or reviewers. Sorry. Um, yeah, and so yeah, and I think like in accounting, you got lease abstraction. I mean, there's so much that happens, and when it comes to like debt contracts and schedule prep and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of the stuff that takes a lot of time for accountants to kind of sift through and work through. Like at the end of the day, you still have to make judgment calls as the accountant. You're still putting and stamping your name on it, but we have agents now, AI agents that can really streamline a lot of that.
Fair. And that brings to mind the question of basically whether the tax industry is ready for this. But I kind of want to ask that question in two different ways. Uh, I'll ask the people side of the equation in a second, but I want to ask about the systems and the data side of the equation first, just because, like you talked about, the need for a proper source of truth to have data actually be able to interact and talk with one another, at least from your conversations with people out in the industry. Are data systems within tax robust enough to actually get the benefit of agentic AI right now?
I would say they definitely are. And of course, like, I think this depends on the firm, right? And the firm level, what their
Right.
data looks like. But I think that's one thing agentic AI is really good at doing, right? Like today, I'm thinking about my own processes and, you know, like my own work and my own job of like, okay, we have all these different data sets. We have, different CRMs and that speaks to our, customer success software and that speaks, and, something else speaks to our like product analytics software, right? And so these are all different systems and all different data and I think, you know, all I want to do is point to these systems and have an AI agent just say, okay, my goal is to create unique identifiers between each, and so that they can all speak together. Like I think these are things that AI agents are perfectly able to do, and I think like I'm not 100% sure of what softwares can actually build this out yet. Maybe we're getting into that future kind of discussion here at this point, but that is exactly the use case that we're trying to automating. And so kind of taking us into the accounting space, right? When we have a product called Workspaces, and when we were first kind of trying to figure out what our Workspaces tool was going to be, when I first joined Materia, which is now CoCounsel, um, it was called checklists, and the idea behind checklists was that we can automate the entire disclosure checklist process. But one thing that we learned really quickly was that disclosure checklists are extremely robust, and they're very much like decision tree, like did you guys apply guidance? And then if you applied the guidance, did you do this? Did you do that? Like that is an extremely tough kind of robust process. And I think like where we are today is like we're really good at that initial question and maybe even the second question. But I think like where we're like trying to get to and ultimately what our North Star is with our Workspaces product is to be able to do something like automated disclosure checklist.
Fair. So then that question I had before, I will ask the other way then. From a people standpoint, or how interested and understanding people are of having AI agents as a part of their own teams, is the tax world ready for that quite yet?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, anyone who's worked in accounting, I'm going to use an example. Like anyone who's worked in accounting knows that let's take onboarding a client, or let's take adopting new guidance, right? It's one of the most painful parts of the job. You're juggling guidance. You got to understand what your position is, and you got to read internal documents. And I think it's very time consuming, manual, and pretty fragmented. I'll use an example from like my own accounting experience. Like I was a corporate accountant. I was a manager at a SaaS company when ASC 842 went into effect. And I remember I was sitting in a room with my senior accountant like for hours, and we were trying to figure out how we were, supposed to apply this new guidance to our leases. And we were looking for, and this might be would have been great if we had that agentic AI tool, hired next to us so we could talk to. But we were looking everywhere for someone who had already figured it out, right? Some other company, some other a team that had cracked it, so we didn't have to, you know, like come up with our own ways of doing this, right? We could just follow their lead. But every example we found was a little bit different, and the structure didn't line up, the assumptions didn't match, and it just didn't apply to our specific leases. So, yeah, if I had an agentic AI tool that I could just, essentially was a partner of ours that we can just tell and give all of our context, feed all of our leases into it, and say, hey, with all of this known and what you know about ASC 842, like where do we start? And like I could tell you right now, back in the day when I was in accounting, we spent the entire afternoon just literally just trying to get oriented, Googling things and just honestly listening to music, half working and half like hoping something would eventually click. And we
That's
did
the
this for
dream.
hours. Yeah, exactly. Just like hoping it would click. So like I would have loved to have a agentic AI, partner next to me. And I definitely think firms are ready for that today.
100%. And one thing I'm curious too, because you've been working at this a while. I mean, the benefits of agentic AI, the time saved, the efficiency are pretty clear. But I'm curious if you've seen any unexpected impacts within the people that you've gone out to with these systems.
Yeah, I think one thing that was certainly unexpected for me is, I mean, how much of a career impact like this technology can be for users, from staff all the way to the partner level even. It's a new technology, which means that when I'm talking to firms and accountants, you know, they come to us kind of with a predetermined idea of what they think AI can do. Um, and almost say like, hey, what are the use cases that people typically use, and of course we have those use cases, and anyone with like, if you're doing a demo for a client, like of course like you should have like just like for a professional level have some use cases, but honestly at the end of the day, all we can do is make sure that these accountants we're working with are aware of the power of the possible. Like this isn't just a new software, this is new technology. And so we actually do have to do some change management with people, and that scales up to their entire firm. And kind of one way this materializes is by like working with subject matter experts at firms. And these subject matter experts can range from literally like first year staff who's super interested in technology. And so they're learning these new processes, but in conjunction with that, they're learning this new AI tool and like kind of thinking about ways differently. And when you identify a use case on your own and you scale that to your whole firm, kind of like even like as a staff, like that kind of puts you on the map at firms. And imagine being that partner partner who brought in this tool, and you're literally transforming the way like staff works and seniors work. And like, I've literally seen people and professionals like using new technology and injecting that into their processes as a way to kind of progress in their career. And now I don't think like that's their main motivation. I think people are genuinely interested in the technology and probably, finding ways to automate things that are really boring for them to do. But ultimately it does, kind of materialize in career progression. And I think like that was something that was unexpected for me. But I mean, certainly is a pretty cool thing to see, and pretty awesome to work with like all those innovative thinkers.
No, and I think that makes sense because that's something honestly we see in our reports as well is that the number one way that people within the tax space want to challenge the talent crunch right now is through automation and technology. And it's not only integrating technology so they can do more with less, but also from a career development standpoint, I think leaders of firms understand that the next generation, the people who are going to be leading their firms, need to be familiar with this because it's going to be the way the future and the way that firms can differentiate from one another. So I think that that makes a lot of sense by me that it really can be a career multiplier, whatever you want to call it, being on board with this stuff early.
Exactly. Yeah. I like even like I legitimately do believe that the use of AI at firms is a legitimate recruiting tool.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, yeah, and in addition to that, even like retention tool. Like I've literally worked with accountants who are like, hey, like, you know, we're not using AI enough, and I'm so glad that we're using like whether it's our tool. I also do have some friends in the industry who are like, I wish we're investing more in this stuff because like a lot of firms can see a lot of users and or a lot of professionals can see the value of it, and so yeah, I think it's not only just a recruiting tool but also a retention tool for those innovative thinkers at firms that we work with or don't work with.
Right. So we're coming up closer to the end of the podcast, but I want to fire a few rapid fire questions your way. Just like some quick, fun things. See how you take them. The very first one, everybody has a name for an AI assistant, a Gemini, and Alexa. What would your name be for your perfect AI assistant?
That's a good question. I'm gonna go with something OG here and say materia.
Ooh, I like it. Keeping the name alive. It's a good way to keep the
Yep.
name alive. It was a big controversy recently when OpenAI came out and said, yeah, it costs us millions of dollars when people say please and thank you to our system. So, do you do that when you use a generative AI or other AI system?
Sometimes by habit, I'll be honest, I do. But it's actually, I've looked into this, and I know this isn't rapid fire, but you don't need to give it that context, and then you are using some extra tokens. So, if you want to speed your response and something more to your context, don't do it. Don't do it.
Fair.
Just be terse.
I'm in that habit too, so I can't break it quite yet. Maybe one day. I really need to. Uh,
Maybe.
Final rapid fire. What's an easy task that an AI agent can do that people don't really think about?
Maybe I don't know if people are thinking about this one, but choose what my girlfriend and I want for dinner. I would say is
Ooh,
probably good for this one.
I like that. I've used generative AI for some sort of make me a grocery list sort of stuff,
Oh, that's a good point. You're right. You're right.
an AI agent that can actually go through the process and maybe even say, "Hey, these are the restaurants that are going to be open at this time. This is what might sound good to you." I can totally see the use case there.
Exactly. Exactly. We're talking about my girlfriend here. So we're going to need much more than just generative AI. We need someone who could break things down into 10 different steps, 20 different cuisines, and then get us the right restaurant. So,
I feel that. Yeah, I sympathize. I go through the same thing very, very often. So, with that said, I just kind of want to get your thoughts a little bit into the future. How exactly do you see agentic AI and tax playing out? Or are there any final points that you haven't made yet that you think is important for the audience to know?
yeah. Yeah, I'll be direct on this one. Honestly, I think that saying AI isn't replacing you, but people using AI might. I think it feels relatively true to a point, to an extent. I think we're at a point where like this isn't theoretical anymore. AI is a tool like anything else out there. When your profession can get hold of this new tool that can harness like a technology, like why wouldn't you be excited to learn how to wield it? And so I think like and I don't think the shift is about replacing talent, right? It's about freeing people up to use their talent. So I think like in 2025, if you're still spending your time digging through documents, recreating work you've done before, and someone's probably using AI to skip that part and move it straight into the analysis and reasoning part. So I would say that the takeaway here is start somewhere. Like don't wait for the perfect use case. Get your hands on it, learn it, and yeah, learn it and learn as you go. Because people who are willing to experiment now are the ones who are leading now and will be leading in the future as well.
Yeah, that's what we find in our research as well, is being hands-on is number one way that people not only become familiar with the tool, but actually become more familiar with the opportunities in their own practice as well. They start to
Right.
see a little bit more of the board, a little bit more of the vision, and maybe there are some opportunities that are available that you weren't even thinking about until you realized that there was an AI tool maybe that could help you out with it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about all the time we have today, but Michael, thank you very much for joining us. This was a great conversation, especially as somebody personally who doesn't know too much about agentic AI and its opportunities and tax. I learned a lot today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
I'd like to thank Michael for taking the time to speak with me today. And I agree that this technology of the future honestly might not be futuristic at all. For leaders of tax audit and accounting firms and departments, agentic AI may be on your doorstep sooner rather than later. And that means the time to start educating yourself is now. Thank you as always for joining us for Clarity on Tech, powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. You can follow or subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to share with your colleagues and leave a 5-star review. For more data-driven analysis of today's professional services market and in-depth conversations with industry thought leaders, visit us online at thomsonreuters.com/institute and follow us on LinkedIn under the Thomson Reuters Institute. Clarity on Tech is a production of Thomson Reuters, copyright Thomson Reuters 2025.